Are you still finding it hard to fill that 1 week position in your starting 11? Or are you not getting those scout reports on time to make a decision on that player that could solve all your problems? Well, whatever your scouting issues may be, hopefully my top 3 simple scouting tips will help guide you and make your life easier when you're trying to find that player to improve your team. If you like the sound of that, then do stick around and chuck a thumbs up on the video. Subscribe for a new top 3 each week, as well as daily Football Manager videos. But with that out the way, let's head into the important stuff. Straight over to number 3. Let's start at number 3 with general scouting focus. The reason? Well, aside from just before and during transfer windows, unless you're in non-league of course, general scouting is an area we want working for us while we're not even focusing on transfers as a manager. Don't worry, we'll get to tips for the transfer window in number 2, but let's be honest here. Outside of transfer windows, many of us are working hard to gel our team and our new signings, improve the dynamics, the dressing room atmosphere, the training, the tactics, and most importantly, get results. But where does that leave transfers? We can't just head back to our scout reports at the start of the next transfer window, having neglected the scouting for 3 or 4 months, and expect everything to have fallen into place again. There's probably only 3 or 4 elite clubs in the world where that can happen. We need our scouts to be doing good work for us, even when we're not particularly worried about it. How do we do that, I hear you ask? Well, at this point, we're going to be looking mainly at a fairly broad plan, as we don't want to restrict our recruitment team from finding good players or upgrades to our squad potentially. However, we can still fine-tune this to make our work easier when the transfer window approaches. Let's head over to FM and see how. So for our general scouting focus, let's start from the home screen in the scouting centre, and you can actually set this up from virtually any screen within the scouting area of Football Manager. But we are going to start by clicking this button at the top here, General. So you can see the scouting responsibility, how many people you've got in your team, including those that are unassigned. You've also got your scouting budgets and everything else you can adjust. But this is the button we're going for, General. Now you can see we've just first come into a club, we've started randomly with Luton Town, but what this allows you to do is find players generally, not search for a specific position, role and drill down into star ability and all of that stuff. But what we want to do is find players that are not just good, not just maybe candidates to join our club or targets that we could potentially look for. We want players who are going to fit our tactic. So at Luton Town, this is the tactic we're regularly playing. And we want to find players that suit it, because there's no point finding 10 great holding midfielders if you're not playing a holding midfielder, or playing a narrow diamond and finding 5 great wingers. It's pointless. So you've got to have players that suit your tactic. You can choose here from any of the 3 presets you've got set up. So you can pick a player that suits your best tactic, and you can drill it down by position if you want. But for general focus, we're not going to do that, because for the most part outside of transfer windows, we just want to find players that generally suit our tactic and that could improve our team. Now, you can drill down in quite a lot of detail into this, and you can make it as flexible as you want it to be. So you can work it down and say, actually my policy is I'm only signing under 27s or under 30s. And you can do that. If the club culture is to not sign over 30s, of course you can do that. You can select by availability, which maybe isn't so important for general focus. It will be for something we get onto later, because we're not in a transfer window. So we don't need them to be available right now, because we might be 4 months away from the next time we can sign someone. It will of course look for players that fit the specific roles you've got set up in your tactics, so it will look for players that can play in the ball playing defender duty rather than just a no-nonsense centre-half. It will look for a sweeper keeper rather than a standard goalkeeper. But you can also add a number of variants to this, so you can go where they're based. If you're looking at work permit issues and things like that, if you only want to sign players who are homegrown in the nation, you might want to look at English players in particular here. You can also, most importantly, match it to players that fit your club culture items. Now, this is great for our number 3 and number 2 tip, which we'll get to in a moment. So definitely keep your eyes on this. If you want to sign young players, look outside the window for the next best wonder kids or whatever else, and keep focused on pleasing your board by matching the club vision items. And most importantly, perhaps, you can also search on stats, which is something that of course gets underappreciated in FM. There's so much of a focus on attributes, but how often do your players not match that? And players who are actually rated a bit more modestly end up performing really well. So if you want to search on players that are actually in form, the ones getting goals and assists, the ones covering the distance, working hard, the goalkeepers, do they hold or parry shots, something crucial to whether you can see goals on the rebound in FM, then these are the sorts of things you can look down into. And maybe it's your way to start transitioning from judging your signings on attributes to judging your players on stats. So that's why the general focus is great. But my recommendation, don't make it too detailed. Don't drill down from position, because when you're outside the transfer window, you just want to find players that can improve your team rather than looking for one specific to fill a void to sign immediately. So that's a bit of a look at general focus for number 3, and some of that advice is going to be useful in a minute as we move on to number 2. For number 2, we switch our attention to the other type of scouting that we're going to use heavily in and around the transfer windows or at peak times if you're in non-league, etc. This will also apply if you feel you've already got the perfect team except from one position that always eludes you. That's where the priority focus allows us to utilise our scouting team to look for a very refined category of players in a certain position. So a month before the transfer window opens, if we haven't found all the targets we need from our general scouting tips, we can drill down to try and fill that void in the squad. You can refine your scouting focus by as little as position and role, and as much as current and star ability. You'll need to be aware of your scouts' attributes when relying on this though, as well as age, where they're based, and most crucially, whether they match all of your club culture objectives when it comes to recruitment. Let's head over to FM and take a better look at this one to see just how much it can do for us. And for a priority focus, we're going to a very similar area. Now, you can actually cheat and do this a little bit earlier because it is the same process that pops up in the recruitment meeting pre-transfer windows and during and a week before the end of the transfer windows in some cases. But here, instead of going in and clicking general, we are going to shift over here to priority focus. Now this forces us to pick a certain position. So as we were discussing, let's say we've got a week to go and we're really happy with our squad, but at left wing back, we're just so weak. We have to get somebody in. We're going to create a priority focus. We've picked the position. Let's create it. Now, how long you want to set this for probably depends on how long you've got left in your recruitment window. If you're doing it a month before, then great, go for a month. The longer you're searching, the more likely it is you'll find a good player. But what often happens is you get the second recruitment meeting a week before the end of the transfer window and it automatically presets to 2 weeks, which is useless. So make sure you change it to 1 week if you're getting that second recruitment meeting right at the end of the transfer window. You can set your priority, but it will be dependent on how many scouts you've got available. The general rule of thumb is 1 scout for low priority, 2 for normal, 3 for high. So if you're at a lower league club, you're basically not going to have the choice of high most of the time. But let's go for it here anyway. We then get to pick what role we want them in. Of course, it will naturally preset to the one you're using. But if you're looking to evolve your team and go on to that next shape, you can look for someone a bit more advanced. You can look for an inverted wingback if you just want to change your style. It also asks you what style of player you want. Do you want a physical one, a leader, a technical one? If you're at a squad where you haven't got many dominant personalities, it's a great chance for you to go and look for a leader. If you want to just get more goals in your team, you can look for a technical or creative player. Do you need to be a bit better defensively? Well, let's get an intelligent player in. All of those options there as well. You can then choose what current or potential ability you want. But as I mentioned a moment ago, be very careful of your scout's judgment because you could miss out on some great players if you say you want 3-star ability as a minimum and your scout's judgment is say 7 out of 20. They might be missing a 3.5-star ability player because they've only rated them 2.5. So err on the side of caution, particularly if you're desperate to get a player in that position. You can judge them yourself then when you get the scout reports. You just want to get a baseline of good players in. So be cautious on that one more than any. It's great to say I wouldn't take less than 3-star, but 3-star in a scout report for an average scout doesn't necessarily mean a 3-star ability player. You've then of course got the same options on availability and range as we had in number 3, but availability you're probably going to want now because this is more of a focus to sign players immediately. So changing that just saves you the heartache on deadline day of getting 4 players suggested that you just can't sign. You can also add all the same customizable options we mentioned earlier. You might even more so than in the previous one want to look for players that are in form now. players that deal with the issues you're having as a team, and this links very nicely to the Data Hub special we did right back in November. I'll put it in the eye above, but it lets you interpret the data there and maybe solve your problem from this screen here, because it's a lot of the same options that you do see in the Data Hub for your team stats. You can also make sure it matches your club vision items again. I recommend having that on. Of course, if it's an emergency sign-in and you just want to make sure you get someone in, you might be happy to ignore it as a one-off. But if you do it too many times, you could have matters taken out of your own hands. So that is the difference in setup between general focus outside the windows and the priority focus that we're going to look at in the middle of transfer windows, when we really want to get that one player in and make sure we improve our team. But neither of those are as important as my number one tip. So let's go and move on to top spot. And number one is scout priorities and assignments. Now, part of this feature actually popped up in our first ever top 3 as a relatively small tip and an underused feature in Football Manager. We're going to expand on it a bit today because it's something that not many people have heard of, even less use, and can be probably your best friend, particularly at certain points in the transfer window. It's a massive aid to recruitment as a whole, and I'm sure I'll be singing about it again in the future on this channel, but I cannot overstate the importance of this one enough. We're going to look at the scout priority screen in a lot more detail this time, and all the other things we can do, because we're going to link it to manual assignments and transfer deadline day as well, and this is where it really comes into its own. In simple terms, the scout priority screen allows you to tell your scouting team what's most important to you, and basically make them turn their attention to it. On deadline day, it can also be particularly helpful. It allows you to break down each scout's workload and determine whether you need to intervene to get timely information about your most important late transfer window targets. And that's the biggest beauty of this area in FM. It helps managers at every level and at virtually every stage of the recruitment process. Whether you've got a tiny team in a low reputation league and you need to prioritise which report you actually get, or in contrast, you're at a big club trying to get a quick report to steal the latest wonder kid from your rival at the 11th hour. Let's head over to FM and take a better look, but this is always one of my favourites. Now, I know I've been on this screen before in our first ever top 3 episode a couple of months ago, but I want to show you this one again, and I want to show you in a bit more detail, because we talked about one of the most underused features in FM being listing your scout priorities. But here, there is actually a bit more you can do than that. As well as linking it to all your focuses and the stuff we've mentioned before, you can use this as a cheat screen or an integral part of your transfer window work. So here for Luton Town, I've looked at a centre midfielder where I want to fill a void. I've put in a player they've signed in real life this summer, an experienced pro that's popped up as someone we might want to consider from our director of football targets, and someone who's already in the basic scout reports as a potential signing. So with those 3 in mind, we want to know which one we want detail on quickly. If we're at the end of a transfer window, we've probably decided which one we'd rather sign, and actually we've got someone who we've got part of a scout report on and we just want to get the full lot. But if it's early in a transfer window like this, I want to know, can we get John Obi Mikel, or can we get more information on the young one who might be better, might be cheaper, earlier in the development, might be a star of the future, but also might be a dud. We don't want to take the gamble on signing them, particularly if they've got an injury. So we want to scout them first and get as much info as possible. So for that, we can either drag and drop as we've showed before, or we can pick one. So let's say John Obi Mikel at the bottom here, and we can just press prioritise assignment at the bottom. If we do that, it will go straight to the top, and that will be our scout's number 1 priority now. What people don't realise as well is from this screen, you can actually have all the other views that you would normally have from the scouting centre, from the player search screen, whatever else you use for transfers. So you can find out exactly what money they're on at the moment, if they've got a contract at a club, how long they're under contract for, and whether that might affect your decision making, whether that might affect their transfer fee. If you're on deadline day and their value's unknown, it can be a really good way to narrow down what sort of offer to take a gamble on. But one of the other things that's really useful on this screen, particularly if you're either a massive club or you're a club that's only got, say, 2 scouts and you don't know how the reports are split between them, you can here filter by scout. So let's say you've got all your scouts selected, there's 2 scouts, you want to pick the first one. And you might have 2 priority reports out of your 5, but they're both assigned to the same scout, and realistically on one deadline day your scout's not going to get both of those reports. So what you can then choose to do, if you say, actually I need these two reports, they're both assigned to the same scout and I've got one other scout who's only doing stuff I'm not that worried about today, well then you can go into the player's profile, you can cancel the assignment, and then you can assign a different scout to them. And that way you can probably get two reports for the price of one on deadline day. It only really works if you've got more than one scout available, which we don't here at the moment. But on deadline day, it is a top tip for getting more reports quickly, because when you just press scout player for a week, you're basically trusting your chief scout, director of football, whoever's leading that team, to assign all the people evenly and sensibly. But that isn't always going to happen, because you might not have the best director of football or chief scout at managing people in the world. So doing this enables you to take a bit of a manual charge of it on deadline day and make sure you get as many reports as quickly as possible, particularly the ones you desperately need. It allows you to make decisions quicker, maybe get that one player in you wouldn't normally on deadline day. And that could be the advantage, particularly in the championship. That's the difference to us between mid-table and the playoffs. So this screen, as is so often the case, forms part of my top tip. But although it's not something you want to do all year, manually assigning your scouts on deadline day and just checking that their workload is spread out evenly enough can make a massive, massive difference in getting late deals over the line. So that's my little scouting guide, including my top 3 tips to help make your recruitment less stressful and more effective. Let us know what other tips you have in the comments and how many of the things we've mentioned you already use in FM. If you enjoyed this video, please do add a lovely thumbs up and subscribe for a new top 3 every Sunday evening. You can of course find all the key playlists in the eye above and links down in the description below. Above my head now is one of my recent videos, and I'll see you here again soon. Thank you very much for watching.